Hello everyone, let me welcome you to my fifth video totally focusing on the NCERT for various competitive examinations. Now in the previous classes we had a discussion about the structure of the nucleus, and over there we have seen that this particular structure was called as your O and M, that is the outer nuclear membrane. The inner one was called as the inner nuclear membrane. This pore was called as your nuclear pore. This was called as your chromatin, and this one was called as your nucleolus. And let me spell this nucleolus properly because it's a very important terminology and people always get confused with this. And we have the nucleoplasm over here. Now, the very important point which I forgot to tell you in the previous class, which I have jotted down for this particular video only, was that this nucleus is helping in the process of cellular reproduction. It is helping in cellular reproduction. Now, what do you mean by cellular reproduction? Cellular reproduction basically means there will be one cell and that cell will be dividing into two cells. And how this dividing takes place, we'll be studying in the higher classes. We'll be studying about the karyokinesis and cytokinesis in the higher classes. Now, determines development of cell by directing chemical activities. I feel we have done a bit about it. So, what we can say that it basically directs the chemical activities of the cells for the process of development. For the developmental process, it guides up the cell. This nucleus is helping in this particular process. So, now if we talk about the organisms like bacteria, now I'm specifically talking about the bacteria. In the case of bacteria, we do not have a well-defined nucleus, right? In the case of bacteria, we basically have something called as nucleoid, which represents your nucleus. Now keep this in mind. Keep this in mind that this O and M and I and M, that is the outer nuclear membrane and the inner nuclear membrane, is absent in the case of bacteria. And if it is absent, so this kind of nucleus like structure is called as your nucleoid. And the organisms which have this particular kind of nucleus, not well developed nucleus, are basically called as your prokaryotic organisms. The word pro here basically means primitive. Primitive means old. We can write it as old or primitive. Karyos, it is derived from a word called as karyos, which basically means your nucleus. So they basically have the primitive nucleus in them. Apart from that, we can add certain more things in it, that they lack cytoplasmic organelles. There are certain factors which we must know about this particular prokaryotic organisms. The first character is the nuclear membrane will be absent in them. The next very important factor in this is the number of chromosomes. Chromosome number will be only one. That means they will be having only one chromosome in them. Instead of the nucleus, we have the something called as the nucleoid in it. And if you talk about the size of it, if you talk about the size of the prokaryotic organism, it ranges from 1 to 10 micrometers. Now the question arises, how we can get to know that 1 micrometer is equal to how much? Let me tell you that 1 micrometer is equal to 10 raised to the power 6 meters. So this is then you can figure out that it will be prokaryotics are the smaller organisms as compared to your eukaryotic organism. Is that clear? Now the very important thing in this is that the membrane bound organelles are absent. Membrane bound organelles are absent. That means that they won't be having any membrane bound organelles present in them. If they have, that will not be membrane bound. that means they will be lying as such. There is no wall-like structure. In nowadays, what you can give, the best example which I can give in this case is a house which does not have well-defined washrooms. Nowadays, people are um, developing those kind of the infrastructure of the houses in which there is no differentiation between the washrooms, and differentiation is there, but the differentiation amount is getting low and low and low. So that means they are developing a prokaryotic homes, prokaryotic rooms in their homes. So similarly, you can correlate this particular thing with the prokaryotic and the eukaryotic stuff. Now let's talk about the opposite of it. That is, if the nucleus has all this thing, that means if it has the ONM and the INM, that is the both the structures are present in it, then it will be called as your eukaryotic organism. Now eukaryotic organism, similar differentiation which we can do over here is, the word eu basically means the new, and the karyotic is derived from a word called as karyos, which basically means your nucleus. So they have well defined nucleus in them. Now the first point which we can talk about the eukaryotic organisms over here is that they basically have the NMs are basically present in them, right? The next very important point which we can talk about them is that they basically have size from size, if you talk about, are from 5 to 100 micrometer, and I already told you that 1 micrometer is equal to 10 is to power minus 6 meters, right? So the next very important point in this is that the very important point in this is that one of my calling. Hold on. Okay, so the next thing which we need to discuss in the case of your eukaryotic organisms is the size of it, which we have already said, that is 5 to 100 micrometers. That is 1 micrometer is equal to 10 to the power minus 6. The membrane bound organelles, we basically find membrane bound organelles are present in this, and the membrane bound organelles were absent in this particular case. As we have told, the nuclear membrane is absent, and a number of chromosomes. So they basically, this eukaryotic organism will be having the chromosome number. The chromosome number will be more than 1. The chromosome number will be more than 1. 1 plus. Is that clear, everyone? So these are the major differences between them. Let me add one very important point. That is, we have certain bacteria, certain bacteria which basically are photosynthetic in nature. We have certain bacteria which are photosynthetic in nature. So that basically means they are having something called as your chlorophyll in it. But if we talk about the case of eukaryotic organism, they basically have a special organelle which is associated for this particular thing, which is basically called as your plastids. So keep this in mind. The prokaryotic organisms which have chlorophyll in it have membrane bound vesicles present. They have the that means the chlorophyll is associated with the membranous vesicles which are formed in the bacteria. Now if you draw the structure of the bacteria from inner side, it has some vesicle like structures or the elevated like structures around it, which are the major part for the photosynthetic bacteria to perform the process of photosynthesis. So what we came to a conclusion that the bacteria does not have plastids in it. That creates the big confusion to be solved of. The confusion was the plants are green just because they have something called as chlorophyll, which is a green pigment, and the green pigment is generally present in the chloroplast, and chloroplast is a kind of plastids. So do the bacteria which are photosynthetic in nature also have the chloroplast? Do they also have the plastids in it? The answer is no, they do not have. So what is the alternative of it? The alternative is pretty simple. They basically have the membrane bound vesicles present in the membrane. There is a membrane bound vesicles like this vesicles are present. So this vesicles are associated for the photosynthetic process in the photosynthetic bacteria, and the prokaryotic organism does not have the plastids in it. Let's finally move upon to the last two topics, that is short topics. That is, the first one is the cytoplasm. Now if you talk about the cytoplasm, you have to start a class in the morning, and this class will be continuing till till few days. So we won't be discussing more about the cytoplasm in this particular video. We'll be just discussing the basic few points of the cytoplasm in this. We'll be elaborating the class more in the next videos. So suppose this is our cell, this is the nucleus, this is your CM, I call it as CM, that is the cell membrane. This I'm calling it the nucleus, and again I'm getting a call, sorry. Okay, so this is nucleus, and this space here is basically donated by your cytoplasm. This donates your cytoplasm. Is it clear? Now the cytoplasm encloses, it is enclosed by the cell membrane. The first point is that the cytoplasm is enclosed by CM, that is the cell membrane. The next very important thing is that takes very little stain. The cell cytoplasm takes very little stain, so it will be lightly stained. I told you when we were starting with the nucleus takes a darker stain just because it is denser in the structure, whereas if you talk about this cytoplasm, it takes very light stain, so it is lightly stained up. So the very next point is light stained. Another very important point which we can add into this is in the cytoplasm is that the cytoplasm is fluid in nature. It's approximately not very jelly like, also it's not very like solid like also, so it's just fluid like structure. Neither it is very much jelly like structure, neither it is very solid like structure. It's in between those structures. Now contains this basically contains special organelles, or it contains some special organs, and these special organs are nothing called as your organelles. So it has certain special organelles which are present inside it. Now this is the basic few points which I would was wanting to give you a brief introduction before we go with the detailed elaboration of the cytoplasmic organelles. So what we are saying, what we have discussed for the cytoplasm is that it is lightly stained structure, it is fluid in nature. Another very important point in this case is your it is enclosed by your cell membrane, and it has certain special organs which are basically called as the organelles, like your mitochondria, lysosomes, Golgi Apparatus, Endoplasmic Reticulums, Vacuoles. So all this will be discussing in the upcoming videos also. The next and last topic which I would like to discover, which I would like to discuss a bit only, is the viruses. So in the previous classes I told you that the viruses are those organisms which do not have the characteristics of living. They have the characteristics of living only when they enter inside the body or a living system. That means when a virus enters inside a living system, it becomes functional, and outside the living system, it is non-living. So this is in the between the living and non-living stuff. It lacks your membrane. It lacks membrane, which is basically not made up of your lipid and protein. Before I quit off with this particular thing, this membrane is also made up of lipids and proteins. This membrane is also made up of lipids and proteins, but the difference of the amount of protein and the lipids may vary according to the different membranes which are found in the different type of cells or in the different organelles, right? So viruses are that case. So they basically lack a membrane. That's why we basically call them as the acellular organism also. Now we can talk a lot about viruses because nowadays, if we talk about the Indian scenario, we basically have started certain specialized courses in virology also. So nowadays we are having a special course called as the MSc in virology, especially for the viruses. And there are so many YouTubers, professors of the various universities which have given a free discussion, a consistent description about the viruses, updated descriptions about viruses, updated everything about the viruses. So you guys can watch them, or we will be discussing only a bit about those particular things. So in the next classes we will be talking about the cell organelles also. The cell organelles, as I said, are basically the organelles which are which will be membrane bound. Either they can be single membrane bound or they can be double layered membranes. The very next important point about them is the organelles which we'll be discussing over here. Some of them can only be seen with the help of the electron microscope. So we can see only microscope, right? There are certain organelles which we can see only with the help of the electron microscope. So the organelles which we'll be discussing in the upcoming classes are the first one is endoplasmic reticulum. The second one is your Golgi apparatus. The next one which we'll be discussing in next class will be your lysosomes. Lysosomes, which are also called as your suicidal bags. We'll be discussing about the mitochondria. We'll be discussing about the plastids also. We'll be discussing about vacuoles also. So these are the organelles which we'll be discussing in the upcoming videos. So thank you for watching my video. I again request you guys, if you like a bit of the thing in my video, just please share it. I just want a good kind of motivation. That's it. And if you can help in any other way, that is most welcome. My email address is there in this particular account, so you can email me up the things. Thank you.